Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's hard to believe that in this nation of immigrants we have such a broken immigration system, but it's a fact. We've addressed so many problems in this system over the years. A few years ago on the floor of the Senate, we passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill, which didn't survive in the House of Representatives. And so it's no surprise that on a regular basis we face challenges when it comes to our existing immigration laws. One of the most serious challenges is the green card backlog in this country. To try to describe it in just the simplest terms, under the current law, there are not nearly enough, in my estimation, immigrant visas, also known as green cards, available each year. Each year in America, there are 226,000 family green cards available and 140,000 employment green cards available each year. 140,000 for a nation of 350 million people. So many of those who are aspiring to get a green card and ultimately move toward permanent resident status and citizenship wait and wait and wait for the day to arrive. Children in many of these families, for workers currently in the United States on things like the H-1B visa, many of these children age out. They reach the age of 21 and they're no longer protected by their parents' presence. And so they're at risk of being deported even as they go into their teenage years. It's a horrible situation. It's really a heartbreaking situation, and I've come to meet and know many of the families affected by it. We're trying to deal with this green card backlog with the reality of current politics in Washington. And under the current political environment, there are limitations on what we can do. My response is to increase the number of green cards that are available each year so that we have more than 140,000 available. There are currently at least 800,000 people waiting for the 140,000 green cards that come up each year. As a consequence, we're in a predicament where we don't have nearly enough green cards for the people who are waiting for them. I would increase that number, but politically that's not going to happen. The president doesn't agree with that position, and many Republicans in the Senate and House don't agree either. So Senator Lee and I have confronted this issue, coming at it from different perspectives, and initially we were at odds on how to approach it. I objected to a bill that he brought to the floor. He objected to a bill I brought to the floor, and then we sat down to talk. The bill I brought to the floor, as I mentioned earlier, would increase the number of green cards, would make sure that the families, while they're waiting, would be protected from deportation, would allow them to travel and to change jobs. That is called the Relief Act. I've introduced it. It's been introduced in the House of Representatives by Congresswoman Shalala, and it's a bill which I still support and would like to see passed. That is my preference. It is not a bill that would pass in the Senate at this time. And so Senator Lee and I sat down to try to find common ground, if we could, on an approach that might work to deal with the backlog in a humane fashion and to protect the families during the course of that. We've come up with a proposal which I think moves us in the right direction, an agreement between us, a bipartisan agreement, which we are now hoping to offer to the Senate for consideration as quickly as possible. I will say very quickly a summary of what it tries to achieve. It protects immigrants and their families who are stuck in the backlog, the green card backlog I mentioned. Immigrant workers and their immediate family members would be eligible for what is styled early filing for their green cards. Immigrant workers would not receive their green cards early, but while waiting, they would be able to switch jobs, travel without losing immigration status. The amendment includes a critical protection from the Relief Act. It protects the children of immigrant workers from aging out of green card eligibility while the family is waiting, so they'll not face deportation. Green card set-asides for immigrant workers stuck in the backlog overseas are provided. The amendment reserves 4,600 green cards on an annual basis for immigrant workers stuck in the backlog overseas and not eligible for early filing. The number is based on the actual, or best approximate number, of the actual number of people who apply for employment green cards from overseas each year. Third, it addresses abuses in the H-1B temporary work visas. The first thing that Senator Lee and I want to make clear is we are committed first and foremost to American workers getting jobs. In those circumstances where American workers with certain skills are not available, we have what's known as the H-1B visa. What we try to do, working with Senator Grassley, is come up with a bipartisan way of strengthening that system. Included in the strengthening in this amendment is a 50-50 rule, which says the amendment would prohibit a company from hiring additional H-1B workers if the company's workforce is more than 50 employees and more than 50% are actually temporary workers. I personally believe those companies are suspect, and this bill raises that question. The 50-50 rule, as we mentioned, is from a bill that Senator Grassley and I introduced, and it was part of comprehensive immigration reform. The reality is that there is abuse in the H-1B system. We don't try to solve every aspect of it, but we do address what we consider to be one of the starting points of the problem that we currently face. And so here's where we are. Senator Lee and I have reached a bipartisan agreement on what we think is a reasonable approach, and we want to make sure it is acceptable to our colleagues to move forward. I've been working on the Democratic side. Senator Lee's been working on the Republican side. We don't believe we can get it done at this very moment, but we are hopeful to get it done very quickly. The reason is obvious. These families affected by this backlog are really going through hardship and concerns that no family should face. The sooner we resolve them, the better. As I've talked to many of these families, they've said, why don't you sit down with Senator Lee and see if we can reach an agreement? I did. We have. Now I hope we can move forward. Mr. President, I yield the floor.